the God of armies, the eternal war for Israel throughout history. The tapestry of human civilization has been woven with the rise and fall of great powers. Empires have stretched their iron hands across continents, dominating the known world with terrifying efficiency. Kingdoms have risen with brutal force, their kings erecting walls that scrape the sky, commanding legions that darkened the horizon, and building castles that seemed impregnable. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the Caesars of Rome, from the chariots of Assyria to the tanks of modern superpowers, the story of nations is often a story of might, conquest, and eventual decay. But amidst this grand parade of titans, one nation stands apart. It is an anomaly in the history of the world. No other nation has walked a path like Israel. It is a story that defies the logic of historians and the calculations of military strategists. A small people, often without territory, wandering for 2 millennia, persecuted in every corner of the globe, scattered like dust in the wind, and fought at every turn. By all natural laws, Israel should have vanished into the sands of time. A footnote in the archives of antiquity alongside the Hittites or the Canaanites, and yet Israel survived. Not only did it survive, but against all odds, it returned. And it returned not as a broken remnant, but with a strength that has stunned the world. Today, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, is one of the most advanced military machines on the planet. Its soldiers are renowned as some of the best trained in existence. Its military intelligence, the Mossad, is feared in the shadows of global espionage. Its technology, from the Iron Dome that intercepts missiles in the sky to the cyber units that fight wars in the digital realm, is admired and emulated by superpowers. But to look at the tanks, the jets, and the satellites is to miss the true source of this power. Israel's true strength did not begin in modern training camps or high-tech weapons laboratories. It did not start in 1948. It began thousands of years ago in tents, in deserts, and at altars made of rough stone. It began with ancient promises whispered under starlit skies, with angels appearing to shepherds, with simple men facing kings. Since the days of Abraham, Israel has lived at war. In each generation, these people have had to fight simply to exist. As the psalmist wrote in Psalm 124, Verse 2, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side when men rose up against us." This is the unfinished sentence that defines their existence. This is the story of a chosen people. This is the story of an army that, by all rights, should never have won a single battle. It is a chronicle of wars decided before they even began, because the true general is not on the battlefield, he is in the heavens. To understand why the army of Israel is so strong today, you need to go back to the beginning. You must go back to the first battle, to the man who heard a promise and decided to fight for it. The first general, Abraham, his name was Abraham, and his story begins not with a crown, but with a call. In the land of Canaan, the geopolitical landscape was a chaotic chessboard. Kings fought each other for dominance, riches, and control of the lucrative trade routes. It was a time of fragile alliances and frequent betrayals, where might made right. Among the many petty kingdoms, a terrifying coalition formed. 4 kings from the east joined forces. They were a juggernaut, sweeping through the territory of the plains, subjugating cities, plundering peoples, and spreading fear wherever they marched. The local kings of the plains rebelled, but they were crushed. One of the cities caught in this violent storm was Sodom, and living within its walls was a man named Lot, Abraham's nephew. When the news reached Abraham, the situation was dire. Lot had been taken prisoner, dragged away along with the women, children, and goods of Sodom. Abraham was a nomad, a man of tents and altars, not a warlord. He had no standing army, no chariots, no siege engines. Any military advisor would have told him that pursuit was suicide. But Abraham did not hesitate. He did not appeal to other kings for help. He looked within his own camp. He gathered 318 men born in his own house. These were not warriors by trade. They were shepherds, servants, field workers. Their hands were calloused from holding staffs, not swords, but Abraham had prepared them. He had instilled in them a discipline and loyalty that transcended mere employment. And more than that, he had something the kings of the East did not have, a promise. Abraham led his small band on a forced march, pursuing the vast army all the way to Dan. He did not attack in the brightness of day, where his numbers would be exposed. He used the cover of night. He divided his men into groups, creating the illusion of a larger force, and attacked by surprise. In the valley of Siddim, under the darkness of the sky, chaos erupted in the enemy camp. The shepherds fought like lions. The armies of kings, flushed with victory and heavy with plunder, were routed by a man who walked with God. It wasn't just a liberation, it was an affirmation. Abraham recovered Lot, the women, the people, and all the goods. Upon returning from battle, flushed with an impossible victory, Abraham was met not just by the grateful kings of the plains, but by a mysterious figure, Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High. Melchizedek brought bread and wine, elements of communion, not war. He blessed Abraham, saying, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." The first war in the Bible was not won by numerical strength. It was not won by superior weaponry. It was won by faith, by the covenant, by obedience. That night, the heavens recorded the first instance of a servant of the Most High defeating kings with only a handful of men. It set a precedent. It began the alignment of a people who would never be able to depend solely on their own sword to prevail. The hands of Moses. War in the desert. Centuries later, the descendants of Abraham had become a multitude, but they were slaves. They left Egypt not through an armed uprising, but through the mighty hand of God, guided by signs, plagues, and miracles. They walked out of chains. The most feared army of the time, the Egyptian charioteers, had been drowned in the Red Sea without a single Hebrew lifting a spear. The people were free, but they were not yet an army. They were a refugee population marching through the desert toward a promise. But they had barely shaken off the dust of slavery when war reached them again. In Rephidim, a cruel desert tribe called Amalek attacked. They did not engage the strong men at the front. They came from behind, hitting the stragglers, the tired, the elderly, the women, and the children. It was not a fair war. It was a cowardly ambush, an attempt to exterminate the weak. It was the first time Israel had to fight with their own hands. Moses, already old, knew his role was not to wield a sword. He called upon a young man named Joshua, raised at his feet, to lead the men. It was the first military mission in the history of Israel, and Joshua would be the field commander. But the true battle would happen elsewhere. While Joshua descended into the valley with the untrained warriors, Moses went up the mountain. In his hand, he carried the staff that once touched the Nile and turned it to blood, the staff that opened the sea. From the top of the mountain, Moses raised his arms to the sky. Below, the clash of metal and the screams of men filled the air. But the soldiers soon noticed a strange phenomenon. While Moses' hands were raised, Israel prevailed. They pushed the Amalekites back. But when Moses' arms grew heavy with fatigue and dropped, Amalek took the advantage and slaughtered the Israelites. Victory in the valley depended entirely on intercession on the high ground. It was more than strategy. It was a visible demonstration of total dependence on the God who had promised to fight for them. Aaron and Hur, realizing the stakes, did not take Moses' place. They supported him. They placed a stone for him to sit on, and each one held up one of his arms, one on the left, one on the right. So Moses remained steady, his hands raised until sunset. That afternoon, it was not just a battle won. It was a lesson sealed for all future generations of Israel. The people win when they are united. They win when there is a synthesis between the sword and prayer, between action and faith, between earth and sky. Joshua defeated the Amalekites by the sword. But the text is clear. The victory was sealed with raised arms. After the battle, Moses built an altar and gave it a name, Yahweh Nissi, the Lord is my banner. Israel was still a nomadic people, without a land, without a throne, without an official army. But it was already beginning to become what God had said, a separate nation, forged in the desert, sustained by war and by promise. Joshua. The walls of Jericho, Moses passed into history, and the mantle of leadership fell on Joshua. He was no longer the young warrior of Rephidim. Now, he was the successor to Israel's greatest prophet, the leader of a multitude, the general of an army that had not yet known walls, fortified cities, or organized kingdoms, but Joshua knew something greater, the voice of God. Right at the beginning of his mission, an order was given: cross the Jordan and take possession of the land. It was the inheritance of centuries, but it would have to be conquered, battle after battle. The first city standing in their way was Jericho. It was a fortress, tall and impenetrable, surrounded by double walls wide enough for chariots to race atop them. To a nomad army with no siege equipment, Jericho was an impossible obstacle. But God did not ask for battering rams, siege towers, or brute force. He gave a battle plan that sounded insane. He ordered them to march in silence. For 6 days, the army of Israel surrounded the city, walking in a silent procession, the only sound being the blowing of the shofars by the priests. The people of Jericho watched from the walls, terrified by the eerie silence of this massive army. On the 7th day, they circled the city 7 times, and at the sound of the long blast of the trumpets, accompanied by a great shout from the people, the impossible happened: the walls fell. They did not fall because of the vibration of the shout. They did not fall because of secret technology. They fell flat because of obedience. Jericho fell, and with it, the fear of the Canaanites rose. But the conquest was not a straight line of victories. The next city, Ai, was smaller and more vulnerable. Joshua sent a small force, confident of an easy win. But there Israel suffered a humiliating defeat. Men died, the army fled, Joshua fell on his face before God. The answer was harsh. There was sin in the camp. A single man, Achan, had taken what was consecrated to God from Jericho. The lesson was hard but clear. Victory does not depend only on tactics. It depends on holiness. The camp had to be purified. After the sin was dealt with, Joshua attacked Ai again. This time, he used a refined strategy of feigned retreat to draw the defenders out. An ambush set behind the city, they conquered Ai. It was a perfect combination of divine guidance and military intelligence. But the war would intensify. 5 Amorite kings joined forces to destroy Gibeon, a new ally of Israel. Joshua marched his men all night, an exhausting uphill climb, to surprise the enemy at dawn. In the heat of the battle, as the enemy fled, Joshua realized he was running out of time. Night was coming, which would allow the enemy to escape and regroup. So Joshua did something that no other commander in history had dared to do. He looked at the sky and spoke to the celestial bodies. He commanded the sun to stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Aijalon. And they did. Daylight lasted until the victory was complete. The book of Joshua states, "There has never been a day like it before or since, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man." Because the Lord fought for Israel, at the end of his campaigns, 31 kings were defeated. Cities were taken. The land was divided, and Israel ceased to be a nomadic multitude. It became an established nation. But each conquest had a cost, and each victory carried a reminder. The promised land would not be inherited by human strength alone, but by faithfulness to the God who fought alongside them, judges and kings, the cycle of war. After Joshua, the people settled, but memory is short. The new generations did not know the wars of the past, nor did they zealously keep the covenant. Israel fell into a dangerous cycle: disobedience, oppression by enemies, repentance, and liberation. Without a king, without unity, without an organized army, Israel was constantly attacked. But when the cry of the people rose, God responded in unlikely ways. He raised up judges, ordinary men and women touched by his Spirit. There was Gideon, an insecure man hiding in a winepress. God called him a mighty man of valor. With only 300 men, armed not with swords, but with torches and pitchers, Gideon defeated an army of 135,000 Midianites. He confused them in the night, causing them to turn on each other. There was Deborah, a prophetess who led when men hesitated. She prophesied victory against the iron chariots of Sisera. God sent a storm that turned the battlefield into mud, rendering the chariots useless, and Israel won. There was Samson, a one-man army. He possessed superhuman strength, but a weakness for his own desires. Yet, in his moments of faith, he faced the Philistines alone, killing 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. But the people wanted stability. They wanted a king like the other nations. God gave them Saul, a tall, imposing warrior. Under Saul, Israel formed its first regular army. They had commanders, strategies, and structure. Saul won victories, but his heart turned from God. Then God looked at a sheep pasture and found a boy. David, a musician, a shepherd, a poet, and a warrior. His introduction to the world was the ultimate asymmetrical warfare, a boy with a sling against a giant in full armor. David defeated Goliath not because he was stronger, but because he came in the name of the Lord of hosts. When David became king, he unified the tribes and established Jerusalem as the capital. He formed the most powerful army in Israel's history up to that point. He had the 3 mighty men, the 30, and thousands of faithful soldiers. He expanded the borders, defeating Philistines, Moabites, Syrians, and Edomites, but David's secret was consultation. Before battle, he asked, "Shall I go up?" And God answered. He did not wage war without the supreme commander. The Psalms he wrote became the war songs of his people, records of internal struggles and external victories. The kingdom divided and the exile. The golden age of Solomon brought peace, but it was fragile. After his death, the kingdom tore in two, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. What followed were centuries of civil strife and vulnerability. There were moments of miraculous intervention. In Judah, King Asa faced an Ethiopian army of 1 million men. He cried out, "Lord, it is nothing for you to help, whether with many or with those who have no power," and the Lord struck the Ethiopians. King Jehoshaphat faced a vast coalition. He did not send the infantry first, he sent the choir. The Levites marched out singing, "Praise the Lord, for his mercy endures forever." The enemies fell into an ambush of their own making and destroyed one another, but the spiritual rot was too deep. The northern kingdom fell to the Assyrians and vanished into history. The southern kingdom, Judah, eventually fell to Babylon. Jerusalem was burned, the temple destroyed, the army disbanded, and the people dragged into exile. It seemed like the end. The story of Israel should have stopped there. A defeated people, landless and scattered, usually disappear within a few generations. The miracle of survival, but the story of Israel is forged in fire. Even dispersed, even without a land, even without soldiers, the promise stood. For almost 2,000 years, Israel ceased to exist as a political entity. Its children were scattered to the four winds. They were enslaved in Rome, persecuted during the Inquisition, massacred in pogroms in Russia, and finally, faced the industrial slaughter of the Holocaust. The world said, "They will never return, the dry bones could not live." But the promise had not been forgotten. On May 14, 1948, the impossible happened. After centuries of exile, the State of Israel was proclaimed. On that very same day, 5 Arab armies attacked. They intended to strangle the newborn state in its cradle. Israel had no tanks, no air force, no reserves. It had survivors, men and women with numbers tattooed on their arms, fresh from the death camps of Europe. They fought with antiquated weapons and desperate courage. Against all logic, Israel won. They survived. In 1967, the Six-Day War shocked the world. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan prepared a massive siege to wipe Israel off the map. Israel launched a preemptive strike. In 6 days, they defeated 3 armies, unified Jerusalem, and captured the Sinai, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank. Military academies still study this campaign as a miracle of strategy and speed. In 1973, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, the enemies attacked again by surprise. Israel was caught off guard. For days, they were pushed back to the brink of destruction. But resistance kindled, reserves mobilized, the tide turned. Stories from the front lines spoke of unexplained phenomena: tanks stopping for no reason, enemies fleeing before shadows, soldiers witnessing lights in the sky. Whether coincidence or miracle, the result was the same: survival. The modern warriors, iron and silicon. Since then, Israel has lived in a state of permanent alert. Missile attacks, intifadas, short wars, but no destruction, no surrender. With each generation, the nation is reborn more prepared, more united. Today, the IDF is a marvel of the modern world. Service is mandatory. Every young man and woman serves. This creates a nation where every citizen is a potential soldier, where the line between the civilian and the military is blurred by necessity. Israel's military doctrine is simple and unyielding. Never again. We will never again be driven into exile. We will never again depend on others to protect us, but courage is now backed by silicon. Israel has become a startup nation of warfare. The whole world knows about the Iron Dome, a defense system that intercepts enemy missiles in the air with millimeter precision. Saving countless lives, Israel leads the world in cyber warfare. Unit 8200 and other intelligence groups fight in the shadows of the internet. They have paralyzed enemy nuclear facilities with code Stuxnet, prevented terror attacks, and monitored threats in real time. The Israeli Air Force commands F-35 fighters modified with Israeli technology. Their Merkava tanks are designed for crew survival and urban combat. They are pioneers in drone technology, autonomous weapons, and battlefield robotics, and in the shadows, the Mossad. The Israeli Secret Service is legendary. From the kidnapping of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in Argentina to the sabotage of hostile nuclear programs, their reach is global. They strike fear into the enemies of Israel without ever being seen. Israel became a superpower not because of its size. It is a tiny sliver of land, but because of necessity. Not because it wants war, but because it learned the hard way that peace in the Middle East must be protected with the sword, the invisible general and the final war. Yet, behind the F-35s and the cyber warriors, the ancient truth remains. Israel fights to exist, and its strength is not just in weapons. It is in the conviction that God still fights for them. The scriptures do not only record the wars of the past, they prophesy the wars yet to come. The book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, speaks of a terrifying future conflict. A leader named Gog, from the land of Magog, will gather a massive coalition: Persia, Iran, Cush, Put, Gomer, Togarmah. They will come against a restored Israel living in safety. The description is apocalyptic, a storm of armies covering the land like clouds. But just as in the days of Abraham, Moses, and Jehoshaphat, God will intervene. Ezekiel describes earthquakes, fire from heaven, and confusion among the enemy ranks. You will know that I am the Lord. The prophet Zechariah declares that Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling to all the surrounding peoples. The nations of the earth will gather against it, but the Lord will fight for Jerusalem. He will descend and stand on the Mount of Olives, and the mountain will split in two. In the book of Revelation, the final war is named Armageddon. The nations gather in the valley of Megiddo to fight the Lamb, but the heavens will open. The one who rides the white horse, faithful and true, will descend with the armies of heaven. He will not come as a suffering servant, but as the King of kings and Lord of lords. He will judge and make war with justice. And Israel will be saved, not by the Iron Dome, not by the Masud, not by the Merkava tank, but because the Messiah will return as a warrior to defend his covenant. Conclusion: an eternal alliance. All the battles of the past, from the 318 men of Abraham to the tank commanders of the Yom Kippur War, were rehearsals. They were chapters in a single, continuous story. The history of Israel culminates in the final victory of the God of hosts. Israel won wars with shepherds. It tore down walls with trumpets. It resisted empires. It survived the fires of exile and the ovens of genocide. It rose from the ashes and stands tall today. When so many greater nations have fallen into dust, how can we explain this? The answer is not in the hardware. It is not in the geopolitics. It is in the covenant made with Abraham under the stars, confirmed with Isaac, reaffirmed with Jacob. It is in the promise made to Moses at the burning bush, in the victories of Joshua, in the war songs of David. It is in the words that echo through the centuries. If the Lord had not been on our side, the enemies would have swallowed us alive. Israel is strong because it does not depend only on itself. It is strong because its history is built on purpose. Each battle carries a reminder. The people that God chose for himself will never be abandoned. Even if wars come, even if nations rise, even if Jerusalem is besieged on all sides, the promise remains. The same God who fought with Abraham in the valley of Siddim, who held up the hands of Moses, who knocked down the walls of Jericho, is the same one who watches over Israel today. He neither slumbers nor sleeps. It is not just an army. It is an eternal alliance. Now you know. The army of Israel is not strong by chance. It is strong because, from the beginning, it has never fought alone.